This screencast will be addressing organic polymers as well as functional groups and essential knowledge for A.1. So, organic functional groups first. So, organic chemistry is the chemistry of carbon and organic molecules. For example, shown here, you have estradiol, which is a type of estrogen, and then testosterone here. Most of you are familiar with these. So these are hormones, and molecularly, this is what they look like. They have this complex sort of a honeycomb shape to them, and you have this little pentagon up here where each of these vertices is assumed to be a carbon atom. So there's a carbon bonded to a carbon bonded to a carbon, but there's so many carbon there that they just assume that each vertex is a carbon. These double lines right here represent double bonds between those carbon atoms. So they shorthand it, but then what you notice is that there are similarities between the structure of estradiol and the structure of testosterone, but then there are differences as well. So some of the differences, of course, are where the double bonds are. So you notice that up here in estradiol, there's a double bond, but there's no double bond there. What you also notice is that there are things stuck onto this honeycomb molecular structure, such as this OH group, right, or this oxygen is double bonded, and here you have a methyl group, a CH3 group. So these groups are called functional groups. This is what is making estradiol react differently than testosterone. So here structure is related to their function. Okay, so these functional groups are important when we're talking about biochemistry and looking at molecular structure and molecular function. There are lots of them, but there are some that you're going to see over and over again, and some ones that I want you to be familiar with and be able to recognize where they are. So the first, where they are. So first is a hydroxyl group, and this is an OH group here. You're assuming that there's a bond between the oxygen and the hydrogen there, and that this bond is indicating that this hydroxyl group is stuck onto something, some X, right? So this is some variable, and it's most likely another carbon atom. But a hydroxyl group is one that you will see. An example all the way on the right here is ethanol. So this is the alcohol that's in beer and wine. So here's the functional group, the alcohol functional group, or rather the hydroxyl functional group. And this is the part of the molecule that's going to react. This is the part of the molecule that is functional, which is why they are a functional group. Others that we'll see, these carbonyl groups. There are two flavors of carbonyls, aldehydes and ketones. We'll take a look at those a little bit later. But for what we're doing now, more important ones that you'll see more frequently are going to be groups, a carboxyl group here. So let's take a second and look at the carboxyl group. The carboxyl group always has the structure of a central carbon here with a double bonded oxygen up here, and then a oxygen bonded to that carbon. So we see this as an ionized form as well as a non-ionized form. The non-ionized form, you'd have this hydroxyl group attached to this. So some of you may get tricked into thinking like, oh, there's the hydroxyl group, but you have to look and see what that hydroxyl group is attached to make sure it's not part of a larger, more important, not more important, but a different functional group. Okay, so in this case, you'd go hydroxyl, but you have to stop and wait and say, okay, look, that hydroxyl is attached to this carbon. Oh, and that carbon is double bonded to an oxygen. So if I zoom out a little bit, I notice that this whole thing is going to be the functional group. Right? So the difference between a non-ionized and ionized, of course, is just that this donates the hydrogen ion to solution. So these groups, since they tend to donate hydrogen ions to solution, are considered acids. So these are acidic groups. So carboxyl groups, any molecule that has this carboxyl group on it, when you put it into solution, is going to ionize. And so we have them, they're called acids. So acetic acid, the acid of vinegar, looks structurally, molecularly like this. And again, here is your functional part of the molecule. Over there, the carboxyl group. So one to take a look at there, and you want to be able to practice sort of writing this out of nowhere. Just, okay, there's the carboxyl group, C double bonded O with an OH. Okay. The next functional group is the amino group. So the amino group is, instead of having a carbon associated with it, is having a nitrogen associated with it. So we were talking about nitrogen from the nitrogen cycle being assimilated into proteins and nucleic acids. Well, here's where the nitrogen actually comes into play in the molecules. So this nitrogen in the ionized version is bonded to 3 hydrogens, right? And the non-ionized, right, version, it is just 2 hydrogens there. So since this ionized picked up a hydrogen out of solution, these are basic groups. Molecules that have amino groups on them are basic. So the amines here, right, glycine is an amino acid, right? And we see here that we have the amino group there. So again, you should be able to practice this writing. This amino group is N, whoops, strike that, is an N with 2 hydrogens. The ionized version is N then with 3 hydrogens bonded to it and a positive charge right there. So carboxyl groups, amino groups, and important functional groups for now. Others, there's a phosphate group, right, which if you're noticing here, these negatives imply that they lost hydrogen ions to solution. And so these are acidic groups as well. When we look at nucleic acids like DNA and RNA, we're going to see a lot of phosphate groups there. And then sulfhydryl groups here, you don't see those too much, but there is sulfur in proteins. So we're going to see these groups sometimes sulfur associated with proteins, and in the phosphate groups, we're going to see these associated again with nucleic acids, right? For example, DNA and RNA. Okay. So there's a quick primer on functional groups. The next topic here is in dealing with polymers and monomers and some basic biochemistry reactions here. Basic, not like acidic, but basic meaning simple or the introductory stuff. So we talked the other day about polymers real quickly, and that a polymer is made up of individual monomers, right? So this mer ending here, this mer suffix, is you can sort of think of it as meaning a structure, right? So if you have a monomer, you have a single structure. If you have a polymer, then you have a multiple structure thing. So in metabolism, in biochemistry, what's going on in cells is that cells are constantly making larger molecules from smaller ones and then making smaller molecules from larger molecules. So in this case, we're going to make a longer polymer from a short one that was already made previously, and we're going to link this individual monomer to it. The good news is that there's only one way that really cells do this, and this is through condensation reactions. Right? Condensation or dehydration synthesis reactions chemically join molecules together. Polymers are synthesized or polymerized. You'll hear me say this word in other screencasts and in class, that you are making a polymer, so this is a polymerization. You're making polymers from monomers here. So the way we do this is that we involve functional groups. So we're going to take a hydroxyl group here and an H that might just be stuck onto a carbon, or this could also be a constituent, H from another hydroxyl group. It's going to depend. But ultimately, though, what I want you to notice here is that you have this hydroxyl group, which is an H and O, and you're taking this H right here. And so when you see this and you see this, the raw materials actually can be water. So what we're going to do is you break this bond, and then you make a bond between this HO and this H, and that indeed gives you water. So you're going to make that bond to make the water molecule, and then this bond is going to get made at the exact same time. So we're breaking bonds, right, and making a bond here, and you end up getting then this larger polymer here. So we say that we are condensing this. This is the condensation reaction because water is appearing, or this is how you can kind of think of it and try to understand it, that water is appearing, right? So when you have condensation on your glass or on the window, that is the water sort of appearing there because of a change in temperature and pressure. What have you? In this case, you have this water appearing because you made it from this hydroxyl and this hydrogen here. So condensation reactions are synthetic reactions. They are polymerizing reactions. Condensation reactions are ways that cells organisms put monomers together to make a larger polymer. The reverse of this is called a hydrolysis reaction. The reverse is taking this longer polymer here and making back this shorter polymer and then this individual monomer right here. So in a hydrolysis reaction, we're going to actually use a water molecule here. And hydrolysis, if you understand what this suffix lysis means, it means to break or to split, right? And what are we splitting? What are we breaking? Well, two things. One, we're going to break this larger molecule up here down into a smaller polymer and then this monomer, so we're breaking or splitting there. But we're also breaking or splitting this water molecule apart, which is the hydro part of this. So we're going to take this H2O molecule, and remember, again, we have this and we have this to make this H2O, and look where they end up. They end up right here, getting stuck back onto that monomer and then onto this shorter polymer here. So again, breaking bonds, making bonds. We're going to break this bond, right? We're going to break the bond here, and then we're going to make the bond. Where are we making the bond? We're making the bond right here between that hydrogen in the water, and we're making the bond here between this hydroxyl group and that individual monomer there. So that's a lot of information really quickly. This slide is important in terms of understanding hydrolysis, the condensation reactions, and the previous slides, again, reviewing the basic structures of the different functional groups.